Okay, so as I was saying, the president was in Michigan yesterday. Now, he had been warned in advance by Michigan's Attorney General in a public letter that it would be against the law for him to not wear a mask in the plant. He had been informed by Ford Motors that it was their policy that anyone entering the facility should wear a mask, and he had been requested by the United Auto Workers Union to wear a mask out of respect for the health of the workers at that plant. Now, he did wear a mask briefly for part of his visit, but he removed the mask while still at the plant, thereby undoing any benefit of having worn it before. He told the press that he removed the mask because he did not want them to have the pleasure of seeing him in it. Now, a photograph was published of him wearing the mask, and that photograph was initially published by ABC and then taken down, possibly at the request of the White House. Now, other news happening. Earlier this week, President Trump shocked the nation by announcing a claim that he is personally taking hydroxychloroquine. We don't have independent verification of that. It certainly would fly in the face of the recommendations of his own FDA for him to be taking it as a precautionary measure. He has repeatedly claimed that it is a good idea for people to take this drug. However, just today, the medical journal The Lancet published the largest ever study of the drug. It surveyed 96,000 coronavirus patients on multiple continents, and the ones who took hydroxychloroquine faced a much higher death risk than those who did not. So again, I would like to advise everyone not to experiment with this drug recklessly, as the president suggests. He has repeatedly used the phrase, "What do you have to lose?" It seems clear that the answer to that question is, in many instances, quite literally, your life. Now, we are expecting the President of the United States at any moment, and we will do our best to fact check him in real time. And thank you for bearing with us. I need to check on one thing, but I will be back with you in just a second. Okay, so we are expecting the President of the United States at any moment. Again, if you're just joining us, I'm Alan Piper, NowThis senior politics producer. I'm apiper13 on Twitter if you'd care to follow me there. I am supported today by our newsroom producers, all of whom are working from home, many of us located in New York City, the global epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, this is a surprise briefing, so we're not sure exactly what the President is going to share with us today. It has been an eventful week. As of this week, some 38 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefits in just the past few weeks, so that is 38 million new unemployed Americans as a result of this current crisis. Now, we are expecting the President at any moment. We would like to use the time that we have to try to answer some of your questions. So if you're watching on Facebook, you can go ahead and type them in the comments. If you are watching on YouTube, Twitter, or another platform, I'm afraid we haven't quite worked out the kinks for how to get your questions to answer them, but we're going to be working on that in the time ahead. Again, I thank you for your patience. We are each coming to you from our own homes as we remain under shelter-in-place orders in most parts of the country. Now, you've heard me mention before that analysis of data from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation showed that 90% of the deaths that have occurred from this pandemic in the U.S. could have been prevented if social distance guidance had been issued just 2 weeks earlier than it was. And that is painful information to process, especially as the U.S. death toll is now over 95,000. I recorded a timeline of the President's response, and at the time that I recorded that on May 1st, the death toll was 65,000, and it was so shocking then that it was almost hard for me to say the words. And now we are not even at the end of the month, and we've added another 30,000 deaths. This is as the President continues to claim that we are on the other side of this thing. Now, I mentioned that analysis that said that 90% of the deaths could have been prevented. A similar study came out this week from Columbia University, an analysis of data that put a very similar estimate, suggesting that 83% of the deaths could have been prevented by putting out social distancing guidelines on March 1st instead of on March 16th when the President did. It's important to note that at March 1st, the President had already been alerted to this crisis by many people, including his own intelligence agencies, and yet he continued to insist that it was not a threat to Americans. As late as March 9th, he was comparing it to the flu and was saying that nothing should change in our society. So this Columbia University study suggests that at least 83% of the deaths could have been prevented if instead of telling Americans that there was nothing to fear, he had been upfront with them about the information that he himself had been presented with. And even if he had waited another week past that, the Columbia University study suggests that at that point, still 50% of the deaths could have been prevented. But on March 9th, President Trump was tweeting, "Nothing is shut down, life and the economy go on." And he compared this disease that has since killed 95,000 Americans to simply the flu. Now, also this week, the world cases crossed 5 million, and the world suffered its single biggest one-day uptick earlier this week as 100,000 new cases were confirmed. So we are absolutely not on the other side of this thing. Here in New York, where we have suffered in our state more than 28,000 deaths, here we seem to be emerging from the other side of this wave. We are now at a point where death tolls, a daily death toll around 100, which would have been shocking and horrifying in the past, is now presented to us as very good news. And it indeed is good news following a long stretch in April when the daily death toll was around 800, and during which mass graves had to be dug on public land for the temporary burial of New Yorkers who died from this crisis. Now, earlier this week, the president shocked the nation by saying that he was taking hydroxychloroquine just in case, and that he was doing it because, largely because he had received a letter from a doctor that he said that he'd never heard of, suggesting that it might be a good idea. Now, we are expecting him to come out any moment now, and when he does, we will attempt to fact-check him in real time. But until that point, I'd like to try to answer any questions that you have, so feel free to go ahead and put them in the comments. Now, regarding hydroxychloroquine, the largest study ever of it was published today in the Lancet, as I mentioned. It surveyed some 96,000 patients on basically every continent, and it found that there was a significantly higher risk of death for patients who took it than patients who did not. So that very clearly seems to answer the question that President Trump asks, what do you have to lose? Now, Emily asks, which is the state with the fewest COVID cases? And the answer, according to Johns Hopkins University, is Alaska. It has the fewest cases of any state in the U.S. with 401, though the territory of American Samoa has 0 confirmed cases. If you are thinking of fleeing to Alaska or American Samoa, please don't. Don't risk taking the virus there. Let's let them have their low number of cases. They don't need us going there and getting them sick. Now, on the topic of hydroxychloroquine, the original French study that suggested that it could be helpful in treatment of the coronavirus has been met with severe criticism and skepticism from the medical community. Later studies have shown, quote, no evidence of clinical efficacy of hydroxychloroquine in patients hospitalized for COVID-19 infection. What we do know is that people who take hydroxychloroquine have faced an increased risk in cardiovascular mortality. Hydroxychloroquine can cause cardiac arrhythmia, that's your heart beating at a random pace instead of the nice ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum that human beings like to have to keep living. It has been known to cause cardiac arrest. It has potentially lethal interactions with diabetes drugs. And so the long and the short of it is, don't follow the president's suggestions on it. Do not take hydroxychloroquine without a doctor's prescription. Now, something else that is alarming about how the president has been promoting it is the fact that it has led to shortages of people who actually need the drug for the medical purposes for which it is prescribed. It is known to be effective in treating malaria, in treating lupus, in treating rheumatoid arthritis, and there are patients who rely on it for their lives who have been facing shortages for a variety of reasons, including the fact that the president ordered FEMA to purchase millions of doses of it as to have on hand to potentially distribute to fight the coronavirus, even though, I'll say it again, there is no evidence to suggest that it is useful in that respect. Now, something else that has been going on lately is the president has fired yet another inspector general. The most recent was the inspector general of the Secretary of State, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but Mala has a question. And, this is interesting. Mala phrases the question, did you see that the rich gained 434 million since the pandemic? Actually, Mala, that is billion with a B. An analysis and report by Americans for Tax Fairness and the Institute of Policy Studies program, based on data from Forbes, saw America's billionaires' fortunes rise by $434 billion with a B between mid-March and mid-May during the lockdown across the U.S. in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This report says that Amazon's Jeff Bezos added $34.6 billion to his wealth, and Mark Zuckerberg added $25 billion. So let's remember this. Let's remember this when we hear, usually Republicans, when we hear lawmakers, most often Republicans, arguing that the U.S. simply does not have the money to further aid the 38 million Americans who are currently unemployed as a result of this crisis. Now, we are expecting the President of the United States at any second, and I just need to check in on something with my team. He is about to come out, I believe. I'm going to check in on something with my team, and I will be back with the President of the United States in just a moment.
Any minute now. Any minute now.
Good update, thank you.
2-minute warning for the 2-minute warning.
Thank you.
So this is the 2-minute warning for the 2-minute warning.
Okay. I'm gonna sit down there. Oh, you can't? Well, do you wanna just do a voiceover? You wanna just take my mic? No? Okay, fine. If you change your mind, let me know, I'm right here. Thanks, Alexis. Yep.
Thank you for your patience. We are expecting the President of the United States at any moment. He is holding an unexpected briefing today. This was not on the schedule, but it has just been added, and the White House press pool was rapidly called into the briefing room. I am Alan Piper, the senior politics producer at NowThis, apiper13 on Twitter if you care to follow. I am supported today by our whole newsroom of producers. All of us are working from home, working remotely, because we are staying safe amid this coronavirus pandemic. Most of us are based in New York City, the global epicenter of this crisis, where in our state, we have lost over 28,000 people to this disease. America has lost over 90,000, and that is a 30,000 increase since just the beginning of this month. It is a shocking and startling number, made more shocking by the seeming indifference that the president shows to the risk currently facing Americans. He has been urging states to reopen even though they are not meeting the criteria that his own administration has put forward to enter phase 1 of reopening. Now, we are going to try to use this time while we're waiting for the president to answer your questions, so please type them in the comments. I'm afraid that's only available to those of you who are watching on Facebook, to people watching in other platforms. We're going to try to find ways for you to get your questions answered. If you want to send questions to me directly on Twitter, I will attempt to answer them as well. Now, we have a few questions that we can answer right now. Ann Kirsty asks, can the White House decide on how the election should be carried out in November? And the answer is no. The president has no power to change the day that America holds federal elections. Congress has that power, but they have not opted to change the day since it was set to its current schedule of the first Tuesday following the first Monday in November back in 1845. And the rules for voting are established by the states. Now, this is an important point because the president has falsely claimed that Michigan and Nevada were breaking the law by sending out applications to vote by mail. This is manifestly false. These states can decide to send out applications to vote by mail if they so choose. The president has had no objection to Republican states doing that, but he seems to object to swing states with Democratic governors doing that. The president has openly suggested that high voter turnout would be bad for him. He said in a Fox News interview, some people described it as saying the quiet part out loud. He said that Democrats wanted levels of voting where if it was ever allowed, a Republican would never be elected again. That is rather a startling statement for a president to make, a leader of a party to make, to acknowledge the idea that in a democratic society, his party can't win if democracy is allowed to work. Now, Jennifer Johnson asks, is he really holding a rally in Charlotte, North Carolina? The answer is that a press release from the RNC marking 100 days from the convention in Charlotte seemed to signal that they were still expecting to have 50,000 people at the 2020 convention, writing nearly 50,000 visitors, including delegates, members of the media, and guests, are expected to gather. The convention is scheduled for the week of August 24th. Now, North Carolina is not really on track at this point to accommodate that. The President of the United States has repeatedly suggested that we might have a vaccine by then, but that does not seem to be borne out by the facts. Medical experts think that a very rapid timetable to having a vaccine could possibly have it available by the end of the year. Dr. Rick Bright, the American scientist who was the head of the U.S. efforts to create a vaccine until he was abruptly fired by President Trump, says that it is more likely that we are at least 18 months off. Now, I mentioned that I've recorded a video on the true timeline of President Trump's response to this crisis. Ian from our newsroom has placed it in the comments, and I invite you to check that out. The president has repeatedly tried to rewrite the timeline of what is happening in his coronavirus response, and it's important to acknowledge what the true facts are. Now, Michelle asks, are convenience store employees considered frontline workers? And the answer to that is yes. Convenience stores are essential. They're essential along with other businesses like grocery stores, pharmacies, hardware stores, post offices, and gas stations. The exact definition of essential varies by location, but non-essential businesses generally don't provide groceries, health, financial support, or utilities. Now, it is very important to note something. If you ever tune in when I'm bringing you the applause for New York's medical and essential workers, you'll know that I harp on this point a lot. But a vast number of the people that our society has traditionally said are not worthy of a living wage are, in fact, when we find ourselves in a crisis, America's most essential workers. These are convenience store workers. These are grocery workers. These are people who work in food service. These are farmers. These are meat packers. These are the truckers who bring the food from the farmers to the markets and to the restaurants. Too many of our essential workers are minimum wage workers. Many of them work for below minimum wage. Restaurant servers are, this is a loophole. If you've never worked as a server, you may not appreciate this. You may think that minimum wage is the least that you can be paid in America. You can actually be paid less. The title is misleading. You can be paid less than minimum wage if there is an assumption that you are tipped and the tips would make up for the difference. But the catch is, people don't always tip, and they don't always tip well. So tipped workers may go home making less than minimum wage. And something else that is alarming is that there is substantial evidence to show that people of color are typically tipped less than white people. So hardworking people of color who are doing some of the essential work in our society, such as bringing you the food that you will eat, are very often paid far below a living wage. In New York, our minimum wage is $15 an hour, which is still not something that would be in New York. But the national minimum wage is $25. And there is a misconception that this is fine because minimum wage workers are just high school kids earning some extra money in their free time in addition to their allowance. But this isn't true. I mean, yes, some minimum wage workers are that. But a large number of our minimum wage workers are supporting families, are full adults. Many are single parents. And it is appalling that in the richest country on earth, there are people who work full-time and still live in poverty. The fundamental bargain that we sort of have as a society is based around the idea that if you work hard and play by the rules, you will be okay. No one has ever advocated that everyone's outcome should be the same, that every job should be paid the same, that that everyone in any position should be making out like they're rich. Nobody's ever suggested that that should be the case. That is something the president and many Republicans like to suggest, that when Democrats seek to raise the minimum wage, that they want minimum wage workers to be paid the same as CEOs, and that suddenly we will lose all motivation in our society for people to try to strive and work harder and move their way up the ladder. But nobody's asking for that. They're asking for people who work full-time not to live in poverty. It's not an outrageous thing. And it's, anyway, that's a rant you will hear me give later. And we are awaiting the President of the United States. At about 5 minutes before 1 p.m., we were alerted that the President would be coming out to speak to us at 1 p.m. And everyone that you see in the White House briefing room hustled into those seats. We rapidly worked to put this broadcast up for you. And now, 40 minutes later, the President has not come out. He's clearly running behind schedule. I'm going to try to check and see if we have any more information on when his arrival will be or what he is expected to speak about when he comes out. In the meantime, please type your questions in the comments and we will attempt to answer them as best we can until the President of the United States shows his unmasked face. Thanks for bearing with us. Again, if you are just joining us, we are expecting the President of the United States at any moment. This is a surprise press briefing, so we are being led to believe that it is something significant that the President wishes to share with us, and we will be bringing it to you in real time and attempting to fact-check it. Now, my name is Alan Piper. I'm the senior politics producer here at NowThis, and we're going to use this time in the interval to try to answer your questions, at least those of you who are watching on Facebook. Maria asks, when does the Senate vote on the HEROES Act relief package? We need another stimulus. House owners are not forgiving. Well, Maria, I hate to tell you, but the Republican Senate majority, which the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, has called this act dead on arrival and basically dismissed it entirely, saying that the bill will have to wait until after the three-day holiday this weekend, meaning that a vote could happen next week, but even that, unfortunately, seems somewhat unlikely. Mitch McConnell has said that there is, quote, no real urgency to work on additional funding. That may come as news to you. It may come as news to the 38 million Americans who have lost their jobs that there is no real urgency. But in Mitch McConnell's perception, there is no urgency to additional funding. Now, I have just been alerted that the President is 2 minutes away. I've gotten the 2-minute warning. He is supposedly about to come out any second now, and I'm just going to make an adjustment to my stream to give you the best quality viewing experience of it, and you'll see how high-tech we are when we are working from home. All right, so we've gotten the 2-minute warning. The President should be out at any second. And when he emerges, we will fact-check him in real time. Okay, here comes the President of the United States. Do I have audio?
At my direction, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is issuing guidance for communities of faith. I want to thank Dr. Redfield and the CDC for their work on this matter and all the other work they've been doing over the past, what now seems like a long period of time. Today, I'm identifying houses of worship, churches, synagogue, and mosques as essential places that provide essential services. Some governors have deemed liquor stores and abortion clinics as essential, but have left out churches and other houses of worship. It's not right. So I'm correcting this injustice and calling houses of worship essential. I call upon governors to allow our churches and places of worship to open right now. If there's any question, they're going to have to call me, but they're not going to be successful in that call. These are places that hold our society together and keep our people united. The people are demanding to go to church and synagogue, go to their mosque. Many millions of Americans embrace worship as an essential part of life. The ministers, pastors, rabbis, imams, and other faith leaders will make sure that their congregations are safe as they gather and pray. I know them well. They love their congregations. They love their people. They don't want anything bad to happen to them or to anybody else. The governors need to do the right thing and allow these very important, essential places of faith to open right now for this weekend. If they don't do it, I will override the governors. In America, we need...
Okay, the President of the United States doesn't actually have that authority to override the governors in this. Okay, so that seems to be the whole statement. That seems to be, all right, this is actually quite startling. Now, I want to just break down a couple of things. Here's what's just happened. The President of the United States has said that he is forcing states to allow houses of worship to open up. Now, houses of worship have continued to have online, virtual ceremonies, virtual services. Many churches have gone to parking lot services. So there are ways that churches have been able to, churches, synagogues, mosques have been able to operate. The president has compared them to liquor stores. Now, I want to highlight that liquor stores never invite dozens or hundreds of people into the store at one time. I'll tell you that here in New York City, the liquor stores that are remaining open are typically not even allowing customers to enter into the store. They just come to the door and can place an order. This idea that that houses of worship, where dozens and hundreds of people come together in one place and breathe, sing, and cheer, is potentially very dangerous. And we have evidence to back that up. One sick singer attended choir practice in Washington, infecting 52 others, 2 of whom died. NBC reports that COVID-19 spread silently through a rural Arkansas church in March. Within 1 week of church events, 35 of 92 parishioners were infected. So this is an alarming thing that the president is suggesting.
Last year, I think that's very important to remind people of, because we had influenza A, influenza B, and then we had COVID-like illness, and while we know it's COVID, that's the last orange peak. What we really find encouraging is across the country, we are below baseline. Why is that particularly important? Now, these are reported state by state, county by county. So each county will be able to see precisely where they are. And then if there's changes in this, it becomes yet again an early alert system. So I've showed you 2 early alert systems. One of them, emergency rooms visits based on our syndromic illness qualifications that the CDC has up on their website, and then the influenza-like illness. And again, to the American people, all of these are available on the CDC website under COVID-19 cases and surveillance. Next slide. Now, I want to show you, I'm going to go through these very quickly. This is where we started. This is influenza-like illness. The red, and the darker the red, the more significant the influenza-like illness is in that state. So you want to get to green. So this is the week ending March 28th. I think many of us can remember what that week was, and this was when we were at the very beginning of our acceleration into logarithmic phase. Next slide. This is April 4th. You're starting to see some of the states already turn green. Next slide. April 11th, more of the country. Next slide. April 18th. Next slide. April 25th. Next slide. May 2nd, and you can see, and I really call your attention to, there's an orange area on this slide, and you can see that it's the Maryland area, and we've been calling that out for a while, the high plateau in Maryland. You can also see Minnesota and Wisconsin. Next slide. And then you can see Wisconsin still. You can see Maryland is yellow. Next slide. I want to turn just a moment, and I know that took you through a lot of slides quickly, but I think we can see as a country, we have decreasing amount of illness, both at the emergency room and reported through the influenza-like illness. Two of the surveillance systems that the CDC has up and running, these come from the states, they come from the counties, and many of the states have these also on their websites. We talked earlier about how we had prioritized testings to the area that had the most significant disease. And you can see now Rhode Island has led all of the states. It's almost up to testing 12% of all of their citizens. That's followed by New York. You can't see New York, but that's the very next one. New York, and then North Dakota. And so you can see that, well, you could. Yeah, you can see that most of the high burden areas of the United States had more.
Now, I don't want to interrupt Dr. Birx too much because I want to let the science-based members of this administration speak as much as possible. But she has been suggesting that the way she phrased her statements about the numbers of new cases and deaths made it sound as if the number of cases is decreasing. And while the rate of new cases may be decreasing, there are still, every day, more cases. The U.S. has added over 172,000 cases in the last week and has added nearly 10,000 deaths in the last week. That has worked out to be about 10,000 per week. We are routinely losing around 2,000 people a day in the U.S. to this disease.
You now into the start of how we use laboratory data to really understand what's happening both in the metros and at the state level. This is every single state, and you can see the triangles. The top part that you can see, the little triangle-y pieces, are the diamonds. That is where the states were in the number of positive tests. This is the nucleic acid test. This is diagnosing virus in your nose. You can see where it was 30 days ago and where it is now by the red squares. You can see a dramatic decline across the states, and indeed, New York City just 6 weeks ago was almost 40%. It is now for the first time as a New York State under 10%. And so this is the progress that we're making in both expanding testing, finding more people, but ensuring that we're getting testing rates at about 10%. This line is 10%. So 42 states are now have less than 10% test positive on a rolling 7-day average. Now, again, I'm going to call your attention to the top 3 states. The top 3 states with the largest percent, and this is so you can all make your decisions about going outside and social distancing, potentially playing golf if you're very careful and you don't touch the flags and all of those issues, playing tennis with marked balls with just one other person so you're only touching your ball. We found really people who enjoy sports have been able to really adjust to social distancing, but you can see the top 3 states are Maryland, the district, and Virginia. And so there is still significant virus circulating here. That is followed by Nebraska, Illinois because of Chicago, and what we've talked about before about Minnesota. So those are our top states.
I want to highlight that she referred to the District of Columbia as a state, which indeed it, many people say should be. It has more people than either Wyoming, Vermont, I think possibly more than Wyoming and Vermont put together, and yet it has no voting member of Congress. And in the CARES Act, it did not receive funding as if it were a state. It received funding as if it were a territory, which is usually less. So what we're highlighting is that one of the areas with the highest concentration per capita of this disease is an area that was specifically targeted to have less funding under the most recent bills passed by Congress.
Or an increase of cases as in Minneapolis. You can see all the other metros are almost all exclusively below 10%. So we see this as great progress across the board in the metro areas. Next slide. So we also look at daily cases and daily case numbers, and I know that you all know that that's a very erratic, and it depends sometimes on how the tests were reported, how the case were reported, and so you often have to look at it over a 3 or 7 day period. This is looking at daily cases on a 7-day rolling average. You can see the number 1 at the top peak that has now come down dramatically is the New York metro area. Underneath that, you can see our concerns about Chicago and our concern in the yellow line of the Washington, D.C. area, because these are two areas that went through their logarithmic phase and are now at a high plateau with an unchanging number of cases day over day. That's the orange line and the yellow line. You can see that the daily case numbers per 100,000 are below the yellow line and the orange line of Washington, D.C. and Chicago. And that's New York and Boston and many of the others. Providence is also up as a per 100,000. And that's the way we like to look at it because we can really then understand it in relationship to populations. The other groups that have very low levels that once had a peak, this is Detroit, very low level now. This is Boston in the gray, which has come way down also. And you can see down here is Atlanta and Miami. Next slide. Now sometimes, and I think recently there have been publications about where the world was before we started the Stop the Spread and before many states shut down. And just to take you back to that moment, on March 14th, before Stop the Spread, this is showing New York. I didn't even put March 14th on there because New York on March 14th had less than 50 cases reported. Chicago had less than 10. Washington had less than 10. LA had less than 20. The large state at that time that had a significant number of cases was the Washington area, Washington state, which had 100 cases. On March 14th, we had about 500 cases distributed around the United States, not in any dramatic hotspot per se, but the majority of those cases and the hotspot at that moment was Washington state. This is how the New York metro area, which includes obviously northern New Jersey, northern parts of Pennsylvania, parts of Connecticut and Rhode Island, and the dramatic decline that they've had in the number of cases. And I know you know that also mortality has started to decrease in that northern New Jersey and New York area. Next slide. But I wanted you to see how we bring all this information together on a daily basis. The red line in this graphic are the emergency room visits. So those are the syndromic visits that I discussed with you at the beginning. The blue line is the test positive, and again, it's very erratic because of the reporting of when cases sometimes from the entire weekend are added on a Monday morning. And then you can see the actual case numbers in the black bars. And so that's how we bring everything together. And what we want to see is all of the items trending down. We want to see the number of positives that you find, because we really have states now looking for asymptomatic cases. So we want to ensure that both asymptomatic cases, symptomatic cases are all declining as shown in the blue line, that emergency room visits are declining and the actual case numbers are declining together. And of course then there's mortality behind that in the green lines that are green bars that are hard for you to see. Next slide. But this is the Washington area. And so that's why I want you to see that contrast. You can see there's not been that dramatic decline in the blue line. There's not been that dramatic decline in the black bars of cases. And there's not been a dramatic decline in the emergency room visits with COVID-like illnesses. So even though Washington has remained closed, LA has remained closed, Chicago has remained closed, we still see these ongoing cases. And I've asked the CDC, and the CDC is working with the local areas in Chicago and this area in LA to really understand where are these new cases coming from and what do we need to do to prevent them in the future. Next slide. This is Chicago, again, just to show you going up into this high plateau that has been fairly persistent. Next slide. And this is Los Angeles. So you can get a flavor of where we have concerns, of where cities have remained closed and metros that have remained closed but have still persistent high number of cases. Next slide. So then I wanted to talk to you about outbreaks, because throughout this all, there's been a large part of America that has been in many states that have been really finding their outbreaks, containing those outbreaks by testing everyone and doing contact tracing, and then stopping them and stopping those outbreaks in their tracks. What we have been talking about everybody being able to do across the United States. And so this illustrates the counties that had a 100% increase in new cases over the last 3 days. Now the reason I wanted to show this is because I see more and more graphics out there that talk about cases going up versus cases going down. Just to give you an example of Wyoming, and I think many of the groups now have Wyoming as a red state of cases going up. Wyoming 3 days ago had 5 cases confirmed, and yesterday had 9. So they qualify almost and show up as this large increase. It's a good alert for us. We immediately look and see what exactly is happening at the state website. But you can see when you have very low number of cases, you can have a doubling from 5 to 10 number of cases and show up as a 100% increase. And so each of these have to be investigated separately to really understand what this is. It is the way we find outbreaks in prisons. It's the way we have been finding outbreaks in nursing homes. And we have this graphic. It goes through all of the counties as well as, next slide. So this is one state's analysis. And what they have shown, and they have been able to find each of their outbreaks, contain every one of their outbreaks, close those outbreaks and call them closed cases. In this case, the dark blue is community spread. The rest of it, 50% of their cases, have been coming from outbreaks that they've been able to contain. The largest group in this is meatpacking plants. And what they've been doing is going in and testing 100% of the individuals in the meatpacking plant, and also finding 100% of the individuals that are associated with those individuals in the meatpacking plant. They've been able to go into group housing, social gatherings. So just as we discuss all of this, and when you go out for this weekend of Memorial Day and you want to do some kind of social gathering, it's very important to maintain that 6 feet distance, and very important to have your mask with you in case that 6 feet different distance cannot be maintained. But it also talks about long-term care facilities. Now, interestingly enough, 50% of their total cases, since they've been tracking, came from these outbreaks. Almost 70+%, 76 of all their mortality, though, came from these outbreaks. And this is why we have been really pushing both in the original Opening Up America Again, in the testing blueprint, we talk about proactive surveillance, proactive monitoring and testing in areas that you know are particularly susceptible to outbreaks. Every state has this knowledge now and this type of analysis. And so when they have these kinds of analysis, what we're asking them to do is proactively go and test everyone in meatpacking plants, to proactively go and test 100% of the residents and workers, and then a follow-up of the workers in every single long-term care facilities. And this is to find the asymptomatic cases. I know CDC yesterday released that they thought 35%. We started with the understanding that we thought it was around 11 to 15% based on the experience with one of the princesses, but now we know it's at least 35. It may be greater than that because it may be so age dependent that there may be a lot of people under 30 that have the virus and are shedding the virus and aren't aware that they have the virus. And so proactive monitoring, proactive testing will become absolutely critical to find these asymptomatic cases. Next slide. So this is my last slide, and this is just to show you what an outbreak looks like. So if you look at this axis, it's normalized through 100,000 population. But you can see this is what we want to see. We want to see very low case number. We want to see that they've identified an outbreak, they've tested 100%, they've contained 100%, and then they don't find any more cases. And so this is what's happening across the country, county by county. This is a county map to really show you the work that's going on. And since the last 2 months, we've gone from, I think, less than 4,000 contact tracers to nearly 50,000 contact tracers. And this is what's been happening behind the scenes. But I really want to applaud the governors and state and the health and local, the health commissioners and the local health departments who have really been working quietly in an unassuming way to really find these cases, track these cases, isolate these cases, and ensure there's no additional spread. And you can see in many of these instances, they've gone more than 2 weeks without any additional spread. And so this is what we are hoping goes across the United States. Now, we all have to admit it's going to be much more difficult in metro areas because you have to really identify where are those asymptomatic cases and how will you find them. And it's why there's been a lot of additional resources going into disadvantaged areas and to the federal community clinics to be able to proactively be able to test for this virus and find asymptomatic individuals. When someone gets sick with COVID, excuse me, when someone gets sick with COVID, you've heard the cases. Some of them have very high fevers. And so they're not out walking around. So they may have been shedding virus for 1 or 2 days before they got significantly ill and they had to be in bed because they felt so terrible. Now think of that. They were maybe out 2 days. And so if they're 50% of the cases, they're only out for 2 of the days that they may be spreading virus. An asymptomatic individual that doesn't know they have COVID, they may be spreading and shedding the entire time that they're in the community. So instead of 2 days, it may be 6 days, or it may be 7 days. And so when we talk about proportions, 35% that are asymptomatic that are out in the community is a much more opportunity for transmission than someone who is getting sick and is only out in the community for 2 days. And so we know we have to find both, and we've been working with states about what proactive surveillance would look like in this case to find people who are asymptomatic. But it's also why we continue to recommend to the public very clearly that you can't tell who's infected. And so that's why you have to continue to social distance. That's why you need to continue to maintain 6 feet apart. I remember in the early days of HIV, people told me all the time that they knew who was infected. And I would say, you don't know who's infected. I could be infected. You're just saying you don't think I'm infected because I look healthy. There's a lot of healthy people out there with COVID that look healthy. And so we're asking continuously for you all to be outside, to enjoy your Memorial Day weekend, to play golf, to hike, as Dr. Fauci said, to play tennis with mark balls, and to be out with your families that you have been in the household with, and to even consider sharing social distance space as long as you have utensils that belong to individuals, and that maybe can be thrown out immediately. There's a lot of things to think through. I know you can do this. I know the American people can do it. And so please, as you go out this weekend, understand you can go out, you can be outside, you can play golf, you can play tennis with marked balls, you can go to the beaches if you stay 6 feet apart. But remember that that is your space, and that's a space that you need to protect and ensure that you're social distance for others. Thank you.
I want to start by, Dr. Birx, if I could have you stay here for just a moment or two. Zeke, I believe you emailed me a question about nursing homes and testing this morning. If you want to ask it, I'll have Dr. Birx give you an answer.
I think that's great. Thank you. Dr. Birx, last week, or sorry, 2 weeks ago, you and the Vice President of Governors, you wanted 100% of nursing home residents and staff tested within 2 weeks. Most states aren't going to meet that. Some 2 weeks later haven't even started to try, saying it's impractical and feasible. Are you disappointed? And also, what are the consequences of that inaction?
No, I know many of you don't know me. I'm a very aspirational and hopeful person that like to put out challenges because I think that's what needs to be done. You know, we've had it in the Open Up America guidance where we asked them to test all the nursing homes, nursing home residents and workers. We know that that group is very susceptible and has significant mortality. And so we continue to ask the states. We always look at the side of the ones who haven't been able to get it done. There are some that are getting it done. And I think what we will learn is from those who were able to get it done, how to do this more efficiently and effectively so that we can work together to ensure that not only we have the baseline testing, but we continuously test the workers within the homes to prevent any asymptomatic spread back to the residents once we show they're negative. We only have 1 million nursing home residents. We're testing way over 1 million people per week, getting closer to over 2 million people a week. So over that 4 million per 2 weeks, I was hoping that 1 million of those could be our nursing home residents. I think week over week as we see testing expand, it's not going to just be, and that's why I keep coming back to this, it's not the number of people you have tested. We see this all the time with other diseases. We have a lot of worried well that will come back frequently to get tested. We want to test, and we want states testing in areas where we know there's higher vulnerability to susceptibility to worse outcomes, like our nursing homes, areas where we know there have been outbreaks, such as prisons, meatpacking plants, particularly areas where people are transported to plants together or live together in a single residence or multiple residents, but there's multiple group home kind of housing situations. And among our inner cities where we know people may have not as much access to testing, it's why money has gone to the federal clinics for testing. It's why money and working with others have really improved testing through the pharmacies and ensuring more accessibility. I know it's a long answer, but we should never be discouraged by those who can't get it done. We should be encouraged by those who have shown us that it can be done. And then on the governor's calls, we have those governors present to the other governors how they did it.
And following up on the president's announcement regarding places of worship being an essential and then having them all reopen, what guidelines and encouragement do you have for pastors, rabbis, imams as they prepare to reopen? Is that appropriate nationwide right now? And what precautions do they need to follow if they're going to reopen their houses of worship?
So and I've checked, all 50 states have on their website what their new cases were over the last 24 or 48 hours. We're trying to get every state to do that by community, by zip code. So because I really firmly believe a knowledgeable community can really make judgments for themselves. I think each one of the leaders in the faith community should be in touch with their local health departments so that they can communicate to their congregates. Certainly people that have significant comorbidities, we want them protected. I know those houses of worship want to protect them. And so really ensuring that maybe they can't go this week if there's high number of COVID cases. Maybe they wait another week. But there is a way to social distance like you are here in places of worship. And I think what we're trying to say with the CDC guidance is there's a way for us to work together to have social distancing and safety for people so that we decrease the amount of exposure that anyone would have to an asymptomatic. And I say it that way because I know all of you and all of Americans, if they didn't feel well, they wouldn't go to church that day.
Take one more for Dr. Brooks. John?
Yeah, Dr. Brooks, can you comment on the latest study on hydroxychloroquine? There's this Lancet study that suggests, again, that the drug could cause heart problems and even increased mortality. The president's obviously said that he's been taking it. What's your recommendation? And what's your recommendation on using that drug as a prophylactic?
Well, first, I think the FDA has been very clear on their website about their concerns about hydroxychloroquine, particularly when it's combined with a macrolide. And I think you see that in the study. And I think the study, although it is open label, and it is, I tell you what I take home from the Lancet study, and I hope everyone here does in addition to what you just commented on, it clearly shows the comorbidity that puts individuals at more risk. And I think it's one of our clearest study because there were so many tens of thousands of individuals involved, that the doctors clearly annotated who had heart disease and who had obesity. And you can see dramatically the increased risk for that. There are still controlled trials going on, both for prophylaxis and pre-exposure prophylaxis, as well as controlled trials looking at, in a hospital setting, how these drugs do. And I think those are still pending. But I hope everyone looks at those comorbidities. And for all of our millennials out there, they get data like this. Look at that. Go through and see if your parents or your grandparents have any of those things, and make sure you're helping protect them. I'm really worried about people in my generation because we're very social at times. And we have a habit of forgetting social distancing or forgetting that glasses. And when you're eating, you can't eat in a mask. So even if you're far enough apart, you have to watch every utensil, everything you touch. I really am asking our great generation of millennials to get some YouTube videos about how to do picnics outside with your friends and still protect everyone and still ensure that there's no co-contamination of food and utensils. I think there's a way to do it, but I want it explained in a YouTube video.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brooks. I know you need to get back to work.
So that was a reference to the new study that was published today in the Lancet, which is a major medical journal. The study showed that in the largest ever study of hydroxychloroquine, patients who took it faced a much greater risk of death than patients who did not.
It's encouraging to see that America's reopening alongside that, with home-based data from home-based noting that 2/3 of America's small businesses are opening. An Open Table study said Americans are now starting to dine out again. Another home-based study, 67% of local food and drink businesses are open. Apple is saying Americans are driving and walking at near normal levels. And Google mobility data reflects the same. So it's encouraging to see America start to reopen and the great work President Trump has done for the faith community going into this weekend. We have a First Amendment. It's very important that we protect that. And these churches, these synagogues, these mosques, they are essential, and President Trump underscored that. And finally, before getting started, I wanted to note that the president, as you all are well aware, donates his salary to various initiatives and parts across the federal government. In this quarter, he will be donating his salary to HHS, Health and Human Services, to develop new therapies for treating and preventing COVID-19 so that we can safely reopen. Here is the check, amounted to $100,000 that will go directly from President Trump and his paycheck that he does not take, but rather donates it to various noble initiatives, including in honor of COVID this time and those who have passed and the studies underway. He'll be donating it to HHS. And with that, I will take questions from you all. Yes.
A couple of questions to follow up on the president's announcement. First, just to clarify, he came out and said, I'm calling upon governors to allow churches and places of worship to open up right now. Dr. Birx just said in areas where they have high cases of COVID-19, maybe they should think about waiting a week. So which is it, and why the mixed messaging?
That's up to the governors. As it's said in our guidance, we note that while many
President Trump actually said it's not up to the governors. He said that if governors do not allow the places of worship to reopen immediately, he will overrule them.
Protected by the First Amendment. The president wants to see these communities open. Dr. Birx was integral to making these guidelines, and they lay out a pretty clear path for faith communities to reopen.
The president said he's going to override the governors. Under what authority would he do that? And to your point, he said several weeks ago, this is all up to the governors.
Well, I think you're posing a hypothetical, and I think we can all hope that we see governors
It's not a hypothetical. He just said it.
and keep churches shut down and keep mosques shut down and keep synagogues shut down. That is a hypothetical question, and we will leave it to these faith communities to reopen.
Said if governors don't
We'll
listen
leave
to
it to
him,
faith
he's gonna
communities to
override their
reopen. And
authority.
Kristen, I think we can all hope that this Sunday people are allowed to pray to their gods across this country. That's a good thing. And I'd also note.
Okay, she's saying this Sunday people should be going back to church. It is Friday. This has just been announced now. Dr. Birx was suggesting that places of worship would come up with ways that people could socially distance within the place of worship. And she compared it to the briefing room where the chairs have been spaced out. Exactly how are places of worship supposed to come up with a plan to allow for social distancing in the next few hours? It is, if synagogues are to be open tomorrow, if churches are to be open on Sunday, if mosques are to be open for to celebrate the end of Ramadan, how are they, with a few hours of notice, supposed to prepare for the level of social distancing? Now, I also want to highlight Kayleigh McEnany, with great fanfare, highlighted that the president is donating this quarter's salary of roughly $100,000 to HHS. Now, I would like to say that his hotels have not donated any hotel rooms. Hilton Hotel has donated 1 million hotel rooms to house medical workers so that they don't go home to their families and expose them to any infection they might have picked up. The Trump hotels have not done that. The president has celebrated many landlords who have waived rent for their tenants. None of the Trump residential buildings have done that. And the Washington Post reported that the U.S. government has paid close to $1 million to Trump businesses since the president took office. And actually, CNN has calculated that the number is $1.2 million of taxpayer money for various services, because when Trump goes to a Trump golf course and stays at a Trump hotel, the U.S. government is charged for the attendance there, is charged for rooms and facilities for the members of Secret Service and for the president's entourage. So this very seemingly magnanimous gift of $100,000 is actually just a drop in the bucket compared to what Trump's companies have taken from U.S. taxpayers.
Has laid out a clear path for this to take place, for our First Amendment to be exercised in a way that is safe and robust. And that is something that is a good thing, and I'm thankful that we have a president who celebrates the First Amendment and helps it to be celebrated in its fullest and most robust way possible. Chanel.
Thank you, Kayleigh. I'd like to switch gears, asking about President Obama. We had
This is OAN, a conspiracy theory outlet.
I would like to ask you if the president has considered pardoning President Obama for illegally wiretapping on Trump Towers, illegally spying on...
There was no illegal wiretapping of Trump Towers. Chanel Rion of OAN is spreading wild conspiracy theories. Chanel Rion was voted out of the White House press pool because she did not respect social distancing guidance. She is not supposed to be there today. The White House Correspondents Association makes its own rules as to how journalists can protect other journalists from this disease. She is not abiding by them, and she was voted out, but the White House has specifically invited her back.
Spokesperson? Oh, not a single journalist has posed that
But
question.
Michael
Okay.
Flynn's name wasn't
So
Matt,
I would like
Kayleigh.
to lay out a series of questions, and perhaps if I write them out in a slide format, maybe we're visual learners and you guys will follow up with journalistic curiosity. So number one, why did the Obama administration use opposition research funded by a political organization and filled with foreign dirt to surveil members of the Trump campaign? Number two, why was
It did not, and we'll come back to that.
masked? Not by the intel community entirely, but by Obama's chief of staff, by the former Vice President Joe Biden, by Susan Rice, by the Treasury Secretary. I mean, this is extraordinary. And, you know, if it were political appointees in the Trump administration, I can guarantee you I'd have questions in my inbox right now, but apparently Obama's spokesperson does not. Why was Flynn's identity leaked? In a criminal act. It is a criminal act to leak the identity of Michael Flynn to the press, but it happened. Where are the questions to Obama's spokesperson? Because my team would be running around this building should this have happened under the Trump administration. Why did the DOJ, Sally Yates, learn about the unmasking from President Obama? So much for going by the book, as Susan Rice said 3 times Thou doth protest too much, Susan Rice. And then finally, question number 5. Why did James Clapper, John Brennan, Samantha Power, and Susan Rice privately admit under oath they had no evidence of collusion while saying the opposite publicly?
So the press secretary is spreading a lot of false and misleading claims here.
Because President Trump's spokespeople certainly would be.
So this appears to be the tactic of... This appears to be a frequent tactic of Kayleigh McEnany to come prepared with some trolly thing to dump on journalists and walk out with, a question to throw back at them instead of asking their own questions. This appears likely to have been concocted in collaboration with Chanel Rion of the fringe conspiracy theory outlet OAN. So I don't want to take the time to get into every one of those things, but let me just run through a little bit of the facts around this so-called unmasking of Michael Flynn, because President Trump, first of all, 95,000 Americans have died. The fact that the White House is preparing slides about President Obama and Russia is and should be shocking and startling. 10,000 Americans have died in the last week. 30,000 Americans have died in the last 3 weeks. The president is far more focused on his sense of grievance with the Obama administration than in the loss of lives of those Americans. And one need only follow his Twitter account to see that in these past 3 weeks, in which 30,000 Americans have died, President Trump has not been tweeting about those Americans. He has been tweeting about this so-called Obamagate. So let me walk you through Obamagate. President Trump has a long history of baseless conspiracy theories, many of them surrounding President Obama. He launched himself onto the political world with the racist birther lie, and now his focus seems to be the so-called unmasking of Michael Flynn. So what does that mean? For starters, it does not mean what it sounds like. Unmasking does not mean leaking his identity to the public. It means something else, and I'll explain it. It is the job of our intelligence agencies to spy on potentially hostile foreign actors. It is not typically their job to spy on American citizens. So when an American communicates with a foreign actor who's under surveillance, that American's name is typically masked in the transcripts of the surveilled conversations to protect the American's privacy. Now, after Russia got caught meddling in the 2016 U.S. election, which has been confirmed by multiple sources, including the Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee, after Russia got caught meddling, U.S. intel was listening to the phone conversations of the Russian ambassador. And just before President Obama left office, Michael Flynn called the Russian ambassador to discuss undermining President Obama's sanctions that he had placed on Russia. Now, since U.S. intel was listening to the ambassador's calls, that conversation was picked up. Since Flynn was an American citizen, his name was initially masked in the transcript. It would have appeared as something like American Citizen 1. But since the conversation pertained to national security, intelligence officials decided they needed to know who the call was with and had his name unmasked. So they did not have Michael Flynn unmasked. They had American Citizen number 1 unmasked. This would be done routinely. It is actually not a scandal. The only part of it that is scandalous is that Michael Flynn was trying to undermine President Obama's foreign policy while Obama was still in office. Flynn knew this was wrong, which is why he lied to the FBI about it, which is also a crime. So that is what is meant by this unmasking. Now, the first question she posed, why did the Obama administration use opposition research funded by a political organization and filled with foreign dirt to spy on members of the Trump campaign? While it appears that the Steele dossier, which initially began as a Republican operation, it began with Republican opposition research to be used against President Trump in the Republican primary, while the Steele dossier appears to have been a factor into the investigation and surveillance of Carter Page, not a bugging of Trump Tower, not an investigation of the campaign overall, but an investigation of Carter Page. The fact of the matter is that the investigation began because George Papadopoulos, a Trump national security advisor, spoke about the fact that he had been contacted by Russians who were seeking to peddle dirt. It was George Papadopoulos who got the investigation started, not the Steele dossier. It was George Papadopoulos. And all right, I think I've dealt with some of the unmasking question. Then, in terms of collusion, well, the Mueller report was very specific that it did not look at the question of collusion because that is not a legal term. President Trump has tried to muddy the waters by saying no collusion, as if as long as there's not collusion, then everything's fine. Collusion isn't a legal term, as Robert Mueller specifically stated in the Mueller report. The Mueller report didn't look at collusion, but the Mueller report did not find instances of criminal conspiracy, but what it did find definitively was that Russia acted with the express intention of helping elect Donald Trump, that Donald Trump knew this was happening, the Trump campaign at least knew this was happening, and actively welcomed and sought out this support. It appears that evidence was not able to prove that there was direct coordination, and this appears to be largely due to the disorganization of the Trump campaign that attempted to collude and was not able to successfully do so because when they attempted to set up meetings with Russians, there were complications. For instance, members of the Trump campaign identified wrong members of the Russian government to talk to. We're going to put a video in the comments that may be helpful. I'm going to send a message to Ian and our team. All right, so I think I've answered some of the questions that Kayleigh McEnany flung at the press. To wrap up, the actual news that was broken today is that President Trump is ordering houses of worship to be allowed to reopen. And he has claimed that if any governor stands in the way of this, he will overrule the governor, even though that appears to exceed his constitutional authority. He compared houses of worship to liquor stores, saying that states are allowing liquor stores to open. Again, states are allowing liquor stores to operate in a modified fashion. What no state is allowing liquor stores to do is invite dozens or hundreds of people into the liquor store and stay there for 45 minutes to 2 hours, singing, chanting, breathing on each other. Here in New York, liquor stores are open, and what happens in nearly every instance is that either there will be a limit of one person being allowed to enter the store at the time, or you may not even be allowed to enter at all. It's just someone standing in the door who will sell the items to you. Now, churches and mosques and synagogues have been finding virtual ways to conduct services, have been finding ways to have the celebration of the divine without physical proximity, but that is apparently not good enough for President Trump, and he and his press secretary have called upon houses of worship to be open by Sunday. This seems to fail to acknowledge that not all religions treat Sunday as the holy day, and it certainly fails to acknowledge the fact that it is Friday afternoon, and that does not provide any sufficient time for a house of worship to figure out a plan for reopening. Now, in California, a person who later learned they were positive for COVID-19 attended a California religious service on Mother's Day and exposed 180 other people to the virus. Also in California, a megachurch found itself at the center of a coronavirus outbreak after public health officials connected it to 71 cases. In Kentucky, a church revival that took place in mid-March has been linked to at least 28 cases of the coronavirus and 2 deaths. And in Kansas, there are at least 3 church-related COVID-19 clusters. It's very tempting. It's very tempting when people decide that they are going to flout the advice of public health officials and put themselves at risk. It's very tempting to say, well, you know what, it's their own lives, fine, let them deal with it. But as those instances highlighted it, it's not their own lives. Those people go to a place and potentially get themselves sick, and then they go back to their communities. They go to their grocery stores. They ride public transit. Here in New York, 123 public transit workers have died. And so when you take a risk, when you decide that you're not going to wear a mask, you're going to go to church, you're going to go about your life as if nothing untoward was happening, you're not only putting your own life at risk, you are putting everyone else at risk. As Dr. Birx highlighted, a large number of people are spreading this disease without presenting symptoms. It is striking. In this briefing, Dr. Birx, a medical professional, was wearing a mask, but President Trump and his press secretary were not. President Trump broke the law yesterday in Michigan by insisting on touring a Ford plant without a mask. And yes, I'm aware, at one point he wore a mask. It makes no difference because he took it off, violating the current law in Michigan, violating the requests of the state attorney general, violating the requests of the United Auto Workers Union, and violating the policies of the Ford plant. And the attorney general warned that that plant may be forced to be shut down by the state to be completely disinfected following the president's visit. When you choose to disregard public health warnings, you are not putting only yourself at risk. You are putting everyone else at risk and their livelihoods. We've lost 28,000 people here in New York. We've lost 95,000 Americans to this disease. It is not a lot to ask of you to put on a mask. It's simply not a lot to ask. We celebrate the greatest generation for going off to war unquestioningly against fascism. That generation was asked to put their lives on the line, to lay down their lives for their country. This generation is being asked to put on a mask. Just grow up and do it. That's what I have to say. My name is Alan Piper. I'm the senior politics producer at NowThis. I had the support today of many people from our newsroom, our virtual newsroom. They are staying at home safely and working remotely. These include Maddie Green, Ian McKenna, and Nico Pitney. To everyone out there, please stay safe. Please take care of yourself. Please follow the guidance of public health officials. If you feel that you are in need of a touch of the divine, read the holy book of whatever religion you profess. Find an online service to attend. Meditate. Pray. Search for the divine, whatever religion you practice. Search for it around you. Witness the divine in the actions of doctors and nurses who are willing to put their lives on the line for our country. But for goodness sake, don't just go stand in a room and sing with people because it makes you feel good in that moment. If that's the only way you can find to connect with God, then you probably are not hearkening as as directly to the tenets of the faith you follow, as well you should. The scripture tells us, "The world is mine, and the fullness thereof, saith the Lord." Find another place to find that fullness. Don't go in a room with dozens of other people and put them at risk. That's what I have to say. I will be back at 7 p.m. to bring you the cheers of New Yorkers celebrating medical and essential workers. Until then, please stay safe.